Welcome, everyone. I hope everyone is well, safe, wherever you may be. And I hope that in your area, things get a little bit better. I know we took a hit in the dental business, whether you're a dentist that's joining us, or a laboratory or manufacturer, whoever you may be today. You know, it's another one of those contraction periods where that hopefully at the end of the tunnel, we will all be able to successfully continue our love of dental technology and things get back to normal. This is a webinar in which we are going to provide CE. So part of that CE is going to make sure that I go through a conflict of interest for those dentists that are joining us that wish to have a CE hour certificate, a letter that we can send you. I do work for a company called VITA North America. They're the ones that sponsor me all the time, 100% of the time, 40 hours a week. So I have to give them credit. We actually have pulled through pretty much through this this time of the virus, the COVID-19, and we will see many of you out in the field very soon, probably starting this fall, where most of the shows are going to start up again. So the webinar today and videos and post-webinars can all be found through our VITA social media, our VITA learning site. You can look them up at YouTube, VITA North America, through LinkedIn, through the Instagram, through Facebook. So all of the videos and webinars are available. They've been recorded on the webinars, the past webinars, which we have probably 15, 20 of them at this time listed. We've been doing them almost every week. You can go on, join and look it up, watch the webinar, and then do CE as well, and 1 hour credit. For those of you who are interested in the credits, what's going to happen is that at the end of the webinar, you will receive an email from our education department, in which you'll just click on a link to acquire the necessary information, and so that we can collect your data, your CDT number, MDT number, and so forth. And then if you're a dentist, your information, so that we can send you a letter. At the end of this webinar, we are going to have the question and answer session. So those of you who throughout this webinar, if you have a question, or at the end, if you'll notice on your panel, on the GoToWebinar panel, there is a segment there that says questions. And when you have a question, just type in, okay? And then send that to me, and then I'll try to capture them, and we'll answer it as we go, or most primarily at the end of the webinar itself. All right, so this is a VITA Learning webinar. I'm Jim McGuire. Today we're going to talk about pressing, a lithium disilicate pressing, the workflow. We call this aesthetic pressing results using a revolutionary zirconia reinforced lithium disilicate glass ceramic. It is something new that VITA has come out with. Those of you who have been with the VITA working with their products for a few years now, almost a decade now ago, we came out with a VM9 derivative called PM9, a pressable ceramic that was compatible with the VM9 series, as well as could be pressed standalone or over a zirconia framework. But today VITA, we have learned so much more on pressing technologies, the do's, the don'ts, and I'll go over these interesting aspects as we go through the webinar. So what we're going to talk about today is a pressed ceramic. It's a pellet. It's a zirconia reinforced lithium disilicate glass ceramic. It does have a high concentration of lithium disilicate. It comes in its metasilicate type form. It is amber color, if you will, and through that amber color and through your press steps, you are going to actually transform it, those crystals, the crystalline structure, it will transform into a shaded pressed restoration, just like you kind of see with Emax or GC Lithium and things of that nature, a silicate-based type information. With that, you're going to have various shades you can work with. We started off with classical, and then we're going to add on more 3D master, but the main market, of course, is classical, VITA classical, the A1 to D4. Now, I can't be more strongly in the opinion that what differentiates our press material from everybody else's out in the market is because VITA owns the shade system, right? We spent a couple years to develop this press material, and the result is that it's got a true shade, whatever it may be, whether it's a classical or a bleached 0M1, 0M3, those would be our bleached materials, the bleach shade, and they come off the 3D master system. But because the market is primarily classic, that's what we started off with. We've got a wide range. We don't have all 16 because, let's face it, not all 16 shades are always used in the laboratory. Most of your dentists that prescribe a shade, let's face it, probably 80% of them are going to select A2, and then they make it work. It's just the nature of the beast of what we have in the market. So the translucency, of course, that is going to offer a high translucent or a translucent. Now, just like your LTs and your OPs and your other types of translucencies with other pressable systems, you'll get used to these different levels of translucency. Primarily, though, the translucent, which has more opacity, it stays true with the shade, but it has more opacity to it. This is where you'd start using to block out a discolored prep. So it's always important to make sure that you have the prep shade as part of the prescription. So if you're doing all ceramics today, whether it's even zirconia on the very highly translucent zirconia at very thin cross sections, there is an influence of the prep shade. So make sure you have your dentist send you the prep shade or a picture for sure of the prep and also the shade tab next to the preparation. And those of you that are dentists that are joining us, they really need, the laboratory really needs this to fabricate and send to you the right shade to match that and blend into that natural dentition of your patient. And then also if you're doing a chairside, if you're a dentist and you're doing chairside digital stuff and you're doing pressing, because you have an in-house laboratory, they need to look at that prep as well. The high translucent, of course, is going to be used when you have a very nice prep shade, where that you're really trying to blend in the material into the prep, or from inside out, I should say. The prep color is going to come through the high translucent material. These are pressed out like every press, but you know, we do it a little bit better, a little bit thinner on pressing out. It's a very nice material, very smooth result, and you can press out fairly thin on these with minimal prep veneers and so forth. But the high translucent's pretty much reserved for those good preps, the translucent to hide a discolored prep or to use for implant cases as well. Now, the implant cases, if you're going to use any pressable or any all ceramic machinable material, sometimes you do have to prep or color out the mask, the titanium abutment. And if you have a titanium abutment, instead of using a ceramic titanium opaque, I suggest that you use a a composite material, an opaque from an indirect composite material. Most manufacturers make one. VITA makes one as well. It's called VMLC, VM veneering material, and then LC for light cured. There's an opaque system, and that way you're not going to throw your titanium abutment into a furnace and then have it oxidized to a very black oxide thick layer that's going to subsequently may flake off because the oxide layer is so thick if you add porcelain to it, or an opaque, a fired opaque. The sizes of our pellets, generally we've kind of moved to what the market is pretty much. We have a small and we have a large, and I'll go over that a little bit as well. Since VITA is the shade company in all of their materials, whether it's from denture teeth all the way through the CAD/CAM digital materials, even through our digital denture Vigo or Vionic materials for dentures, we incorporate opalescence, fluorescence, and we try to make that as natural as possible. So we want the similar properties of a natural tooth. So this material, again, is going to shine as far as aesthetics go, because VITA's taken its time to develop a press pellet that the result is excellent as far as mimicking the natural tooth properties, allows a great amount of light transmission, especially on that high translucent pellet. Once you press it out, you can press these out from about 0.3 of a millimeter on the facial of the veneer, all the way to almost about 2 millimeters of thickness, no problem at all. So the result is from the amber color, the very translucent, and those are going to come in various colors depending on the shade because of the pigments. These are very amber-like, and then they become very reddish in your C's and D shades. But they do transform, as I mentioned, from this metasilicate type blending to natural tooth shades very easily, and it provides a very nice aesthetic result. We also, as I mentioned, VITA took a lot of time to develop a product so that during the transformation from your metasilicate amber color, if you will, the translucent stuff, you're going to end up with, at the end, it's a very consistent shade match to your shade tabs. So there's very little amount of post-processing having to be done after you press out. It's a very close resemblance to the shade tab. But I want everyone to understand that when you look at a shade tab, VITA is the standard, the gold standard of shade, the shade guide, the shade tabs, the color. But everyone should understand that those shade tabs that VITA fabricates, we started a long time ago to fabricate these, and they are made out of a special metal ceramic material. And so inside each shade tab, there's actually a little opacious pellet that we opaque, and then primarily we hand layer around that. We're moving over to more of an automated system to fabricate these shade tabs, because now with the technology, we need to make sure that an A2 tab, for instance, that's produced 5 years ago is the same if you purchase one today. So we're able to use that automation process to consistently make shade tabs that look very, very, very similar. If any of you are having issues with shade matching, this is not a shade webinar, but it's really important for everyone to understand, dentists and technicians alike, that if you're having trouble with shade matching between the operatory, the clinic, and the laboratory, partly it could be that somebody's using an older shade tab that's maybe 10 years old, 15 years old, 20 years old, that came out of the school. When you were through school, you got one probably for free, and you still use that. But I call it generational changes in that every time we change the shade guide look, it moves, and from the shade of an A2, we tighten or narrow the tolerance of what that color should look like. So you could run across where if you have a modern shade tab that you purchased today and you compare it to a 10, 15, 20-year-old shade guide, it is possible they slightly look different. So make sure you're on the same generational guide shade tab between the laboratory and the dentist. Okay. So we have this material called Accent Plus. It's a universal stain glaze system. We use this for all of our products across the board, and it's used included with to go over the ambria or the lithium disilicate press material very nicely. This Accent Plus material, it also comes with what we call a low temperature glaze that universally pretty much can be used from Emax all the way through any other ceramic based material on the market, and including an oxide, Zirconia oxide material. The low temperature glaze and these stains are fully acceptable and universal for all of those materials on the market. It's a really nice system. We now have basic colors, the color scheme in which you can mix and match. These are easily matched. A lot of times, especially for Zirconia, which lack a lot of internal light transmission and fluorescence, what these your stains and glaze can do for Zirconia is actually brighten them up as far as fluorescence. The only one that really doesn't fluoresce, of course, is your very dark colors, because it's a pigment. It just absorbs it and never comes back, so you don't see the fluorescence there. But the glaze itself is highly fluorescence, whether it's the standard glaze or the low temperature glaze. Very nice system. VITA used to have these colors, these effect stains, that primarily we would have somebody match, and primarily we get calls that ask us, okay, I have an A2, for instance, what stain do you have for an A2? Well, in the past we used to say, well, mix a little of the 5, mix a little bit 4, and you're going to get that the color to kind of blend in. But what VITA's eventually done, which I'm so happy for, is that they've looked at the teeth and they understand that when people call and they say A2, I need an A2 stain, what they're really talking about is primarily the cervical third and slightly in the middle third. They need a little bit more intense chroma, but they need it to match right out of the bottle, right out of the jar, to match A2. And that's all they're going to use it for, is to just make it a little bit more of an A2. So we introduced a stain called Accent Plus. It's in the family. Again, you can mix this with the other stains. You can dilute it with white if you want. But right out of the bottle, whether it's a classic shade or 3D master, these stains are used specifically for that grouping. If it's classic, you have a Chroma A, you have a Chroma B, Chroma C, Chroma D. And that way when people, when you call and say, hey, Jim, what do you have for a stain that I can make my A2 look a little bit better, my A4? Do you have something that I can shift from a A3 to an A3.5 or an A4, or I need a little bit more, it's in between an A1 and an A2. Now we just get you one of these A bottles, right? So it's pretty much, color by numbers now today on the stains. And then we use the other materials for effects, for characterizations, your blues, your violets, your grays, your blacks, and so forth, your whites, use this material to create halos and so forth. But the chroma is, if you got something slightly off, you need to match it up a little bit more, because obviously when we look at natural teeth and we take a shade, the shade guide is a baseline, right? It's only a guide. It's not a shade exact. It's a shade guide. So the tabs are approximate interspaced colors in which obviously we pick the closest match, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's completely 100% matched with that natural tooth. Most natural teeth, especially on the classic side, have multiple classical shades within them. So really what you're doing is primarily trying to characterize it, chromatize it, add some saturation to blend it in, but you're really just adding a little bit. If you've selected the right material, the right translucency, the right product for the right indication, you're going to be pretty close to the match already. But if you need to add a little bit more stain, that's what these chroma stains are utilized for. And then, like I said, you go back and then after you use this chroma stain to match the actual shade, if you want, that you're looking for, then you can go back and you can start using all these characterization colors for whatever you want. Now, when it comes to pressables, right, we press it out. You can either cut it back, do micro layering, press it to full contour, and then we can stain it. And we can achieve external glass stains to be placed on crowns. And really make it look natural, the effects, right? It's all an optical illusion by adding some bluish, some reddish, some grayish, some purplish, mixing the stains up, whitish if you want. The blue can give you kind of a lighter, translucent look to it. The blackish, mixed up, spread out thin, makes it appear more depth-like. Same with the dark brown and so forth. But you can do a lot externally with just pressed out full contour restorations with this material. One thing I just want to always point out is that when it comes to stain and glaze, literature suggests that anything below the cervical tissue line, the CEJ, in that area we try to polish instead of glaze. Okay, the tissue, the soft tissue, adheres to ceramics much better when it's just polished versus the glaze, because microscopically when you just polish it, it has that right surface texture that tissue loves. And especially if you're going to do implant cases, implant crowns, anything sub-G, you may want to just think about just highly polishing it instead of glazing all the way down through that cervical neck. But the results for a pressable for this press material is excellent. Again, you can characterize it if you need to. In this case, you've got posteriors where the pits, if you need to color it. We primarily today, at least in the U.S., we don't use a lot of pitting stains. We don't use the smoker stain anymore, that type of stuff. Most customers, most patients prefer just a pure white look, bleachy look. But there is characterization that's always needed. So here you see a bunch of whitish, to act like the frosty cuss tips, or on the facial of an anterior that's needed some, calcification spots and some effects that are really going to help you blend that restoration into the surrounding dentition. Now you're able to press out a bridge, single unit or 3-unit bridges with this material. It is a strong strength material. Let's say you wanted to really characterize it, individualize it. Well, we have a porcelain today. It's called Lumex AC. That is actually a very universal, versatile ceramic that can be used for the ambria. So if you micro layer it, you want to micro layer it, you want to add a little bit more different translucencies, a little bit more characterization from the internal aspect that you just can't get or obtain from external glass stains. You can wax it up, right, with your pre-cut back in your wax up. So you don't have to do it. You don't have to fool around with a rotary instrument after it's pressed and then cut all that glass back. It's much easier and better for the material if you wax it to the where it's already cut back, and then once it's pressed out, then you prepare it roughen it up, and then you just start adding your porcelain to it, your micro layering. Now, the Lumex AC, it's a very universal material. So we have with this material, it's a lower fusing material, and with this, we have the ability to use this Lumex AC not only for the Ambria material, but it goes on Zirconia. It will work for your Emax CAD, Emax Press, the Lithium stuff. Everything with a disilicate, everything with a zirconia oxide. It'll actually work with our VITA blocks, which is feldspathic material. The other thing it doesn't work too well with is the primary silicate, lithium silicate materials, Celtor Duo, or even our own Supernity PC. The CTE range is out of bounds for this Lumex AC. But definitely, it's a material in which you can use for multiple purposes. You can even use the Lumex AC for standalone, no framework type inlays, onlays, veneers, and so forth. So it's a very nice, very excellent porcelain that VITA's just come out with. It's a little bit more towards the opacious dentin scheme, so we're kind of getting back to what the market, what we're really used to as a dental technician when we're layering, or a dentist when you do some micro layering, more traditional layering scheme. But it's nice because no matter what the temperature for any of these materials, because it has a wide range of CTE on all these different materials. From the high to low, we have some nice sharp edges as a result. So moving to the AC, the Lumex AC, AC standing for all ceramic material. And if you are a VM9 user, you shouldn't be afraid of this new material. It's going to offer you so much more flexibility as far as just having one porcelain system in your laboratory. But if you were to compare the Lumex AC to the VM9 was really, and all the VM13, VM11, VM7, the original VM7 for alumina cores, it was based more on a translucent scale. There wasn't much balance between a translucency and the opacity for these newer porcelains that VITA came out with. So they kind of fell back to at least the base materials. They dialed it back to translucency and added a little bit more of the opacity level. And then all of the other professional effect powders that you're going to add to it, that's when we really start working in the very translucent materials. So if the first layerings you do are always going to be a little bit more opacious, because you don't want to use a very translucent powder on the inner layer, because then once you add something that's a little more opacious on that, it's going to completely block it out. The light won't penetrate your opacious material, and you're really not utilizing your outer layers of very translucent powder. So now we've got, with this Lumex AC, it really ranges from opaque-ish, and I don't even say opaque, but more opaque, less translucent, even though they're all translucent. But we have a wider range of acceptance as far as the opacity, translucency level. The enamels that you can place on the pressable, on the Ambria pressable, they're very unique as well. We redid a lot of these materials that we originally had recipes for on the VM line, but we made like a true clear now. We changed the names a little bit. We have different, opaque, translucent levels with different chroma saturations on the enamels to provide a translucency, but also to add in a little bit of more chroma effect. And then also the fogginess, of course. It's almost like the neutral material. But this is a very versatile porcelain system. It has everything you really need to make an ideal customized unit. If you're pressing and you're micro layering, it's a very nice material. We've done a lot of homework as far as research. Everyone knows that VITA, they don't really release anything unless they've really perfected it, and they know that it works long term. That's good for the patient, wear kind, and so forth. This just shows you on the right-hand side, between the Ambria and this Lumex AC, we have a nice laying down of the porcelain adaptation to the Ambria, where it fuses nicely. There's no air seam or anything. So it's a very nice homogeneous adaptation. So if you try to pull the two parts together, you don't get an adhesive failure. It's always a cohesive failure, which is what we want to see if, in fact, anything fractures or cracks. So the pressable itself, it kind of still follows the process that you're used to. Many of you are saying, well, what's going to happen? What am I going to do with another press system? But what we've done specifically is develop this material so that you have high strength, but you also have consistent shades. Like I mentioned earlier, you really have a material now that is going to start matching up with your shade tabs, and then with that, you're going to do less and less, have to do work it less and less with a lot of characterization or a lot of staining and so forth. The material can just be polished. So we can either stain it, we can polish it, we can stain it, glaze it, or we can micro layer it if we want. The process itself, there's really nothing different except for the investment material that we've done. We've looked at all of the competitive press systems, determine what might be missing in some of those systems. Primarily, it was shade consistency, the true color coming out after it's pressed. And so we really worked on that. And then the third thing was we needed to make sure that it was the investment and so forth was modernized to avoid that reactive layer that you often see. But the process itself is still traditional. You wax it, you sprue it. Certain limitations as far as your sprue, you're going to look at these as almost like a flower coming off the sprue former. So you want to make it so that the sprue comes off, and then your restorations kind of flow out as like a flower, a petal, the petals from the stem of the flower itself. So everything, no right angles, except for maybe your line angles around in the edge from the incisal, maybe to your mesial distal contact line angles. But everything's got to flow, just like before. The system has a clear ring former, so you can actually see and watch it, so you make sure that you're filling it up completely. You have different ratios as far as liquid water, depending on the, just like always, right? In dental technology, we've learned this from the old days that throughout the year, you have to sometimes change the water liquid ratio to accommodate the moisture or humidity if you're in areas with humidity, the air conditioning, the heating, throughout the year. So you just have to follow the basic steps that we've always followed in the industry. We have the small and the large pellets. So it just like your any other system, you're going to wax it, and then you're going to weigh that wax minus whatever framework. If you're going over a zirconia framework, you weigh that zirconia framework first, and then you wax it, and then you weigh it again, and that'll give you an approximate gram weight, in which then you can determine what size pellet, and then determine the ring size as well. I know laboratories, especially production labs, they only stick to 200-gram rings because they fill them up. But even if they do one or two, they'll still stay with a 200-gram ring because, we've learned this experience throughout the years through pressing, even my own pressing when I was in the lab on the bench, pressing original press materials. The rings, if you're not following the liquid-water ratio, if you're not following the setting rules of this rapid rapid fire type investments, you know, if you're not setting into the burnout oven at the right time, you can get a lot of macro factors in your investment. So the investments that VITA now has, of course, reduces that reactive layer, but it's a very strong. It's dedicated primarily for pressing. So it's a very hard material, but yet is easily cleanable once it comes out of the furnace. We've also provided you with these little gauges, if you will. So they're clear plastic, and you would set them on without the ring former itself. I didn't have a picture of just the sprued ones, and I didn't have time to create some and retake pictures. But these are gauges so that you can put around your sprued restorations to make sure they follow the guidelines. So it's just a very simple clear plastic card. You see over your wax restorations, your sprued ones, and you make sure that they follow the appropriate distance from the ring, about 10 millimeters, the right angles, and so forth. But it's a really nice added product, if you will. Just a reminder to make sure that they are set correctly. The process is the same, right? We have specific investments that are dedicated for pressing. We wait about 20 minutes. We take it out of the sprue former. And when you take it out after 20 minutes, this material is still very hot. I mean, you can see wax kind of melting out. And the reason we have to start doing the process early on, while it's still hot, is that if you introduce it to your burnout furnace, you don't want to cause it a thermal shock. So a lot of the production laboratories, what they'll do is they'll have a dedicated furnace that's a little bit less in temperature. The final burnout temperature that we use is 850, but maybe you have one at 600 degrees or 700 degrees. And you leave it in that first to initially start making sure that your rings elevate to the right temperature or close to it, and then you move it over. You kind of tap it as you take it out to make sure that any residue's out, and then you move it over to your final burnout furnace at 850, and then at that point you then start adhering to the time that it's in there, 50 minutes for a small ring, 70 minutes for large ring. If you add additional rings, you add another 15, 20 minutes for each ring, and so forth, just like you're used to doing. And then once it's ready, once it's burnt out, you take it out of the furnace, your burnout furnace, but you want to make sure as you bring it out, again, you grab it with your forceps, with your ring forceps, and you're going to slightly tap it just to make sure that there's any debris or anything that's knocked loose. If you take it out and it's still blackish, it's not burnt out correctly, right? You still have some of those oxides. Try to use the dedicated burnout furnaces that you're not using for metal and so forth. Make sure it's a dedicated burnout furnace for pressing, and that way you keep everything clean. And then the next step, of course, is to transfer it from your burnout furnace onto your press furnace. There's many press furnaces on the market. This material is equivalent to the sizes. The pellets are equivalent to the sizes in the sprue formers, or about the same as like EMAX. So if you have already the ring system that you like, you would be able to just substitute with the Ambria pellets, whether a 3 gram or a 5 gram, and just use that, but yet not have to change your entire process of the rings and your investment and things like that. But we don't, for our disposable pistons, or the pellet itself, we do not place in the burnout furnace. We don't heat those up. Those are cold as we place them on into the ring, the press ring. And then, of course, we use a press furnace, and it presses. This VITA MP for pressing, this pressing furnace actually has a universal firing tray, so you can put 100 gram or 200 gram. There's no need to change out your firing trays at all. It's all ready to go for no matter what you're doing. And then, of course, once it's pressed through, you have the process of eliminating that investment. I don't know if Whipmix still makes it or not, but Whipmix used to make an auto divester. I'm sure there's still some on the market somewhere. We used this a couple of years ago, and it worked really nice. But you still have to kind of prep it, if you will, prep it to eliminate some of your investment. So you're sandblasting, you don't have to do all the work with the sandblasting. So since we know the pellet, the piston, the disposable piston, we know that length of that, and we can mark it up and then cut this whole segment off, cut it, and then we start using your sandblaster, luminous oxide, 50 micron luminous oxide. We start off around 4 bar. And then once those restorations are exposed, you need to lower it down to 2 bar. If you try to sandblast this at too high of a pressure, you will cause damage pitting to those restorations. So you got to make sure you don't, you lower that pressure. Now, once it's done, once you've divested it, you're going to remove it, clean it up, and then just use diamond instruments, just like you do traditionally, to contour it, to finish it up. But we did spend a lot of time developing this investment liquid so that when you have a phosphate bonded type investment, that during the process, as you press this lithium disilicate inside your molds, that lithium disilicate has a tendency to adhere to a phosphate bonded type material, and then it just strips it off at the end. So that's why you have that what we call the reactive layer. This investment, the liquid that we use, at least on ours, pretty much eliminates all of that reactive layer. So it comes out really nice and clean. So you don't have to use typically an acid to try to remove that reactive layer at all. Now, as far as most of us in lab, we've done this before, but it's always worth noting again that your furnaces, no matter what they are, you need to make sure that you occasionally check them for temperature and you check them for contamination, right? So there's several ways to do that. In our VITA furnaces, they have pre-programmed cleaning cycles. You want to be able to take, like in our case, maybe the Lumex AC. You want to make sure that on the window, the clear, you put a pellet in there, you put a little piece in there, you fire it at the right temperature, it should come out clear. What you don't want to see is something like this, where the clear comes out a yellowish or brownish or is very opaque, right? This is a way that we can determine that your furnace is tuned up in a sense. So if you have contamination, you have to properly decontaminate your furnace. We usually use fire the temperature in our furnaces at 1,000 degrees Celsius and hold it for 15 minutes, and that pretty much burns out everything. So if you are using multiple restorations in one furnace, PFM work, stuff with silver, stuff with gold, and then doing your all ceramics, especially when you switch over to all ceramics, make sure that you do yourself a favor. You kind of clean your furnace periodically. You may have to do it every week, right? Otherwise, if you're trying to achieve shade and your furnace is contaminated, even a pressed material, right, you're not going to get the right shade because all of those pigments, all of that contaminated material that's inside your muffle, it floats into that ceramic as it starts to swell up and heat up and wet, right? So it's possible you can even contaminate a press inside of a ring as well. So make sure you do your tune-up occasionally for your restoration. Now, this is something that VITA came out with. We get a lot of calls that ask, well, how can I tell that I'm at the right temperature? How is that? What can I do? Because it looks a little bit a little bit more opacious, it looks a little bit more translucent, and da-da-da-da. Well, VITA came out with a solution that if you use just like a mesh, this is the mesh from a partial denture, right, on the saddle area. If those of you are familiar with removable work, there is a mesh material that we use to do the saddles. We would just cut those out and add them to the sprue along with a dummy unit. And then if it's the right temperature, the grid, all right, comes out nice and clean with sharpness between your edges and so forth, right? It's smooth, and if you're using our investment, our liquid, there's really no reactive layer to it. So if you start having a different color, more of an opaque-ish look, you may have your press set at too low, right? We'll give you guidelines on a baseline for the temperature, but in your individual laboratory, not just our furnace, but every furnace is slightly different from laboratory to laboratory or office to office. So when you initially get a new furnace, you need to kind of calibrate it for that particular material and kind of do a test very similar to this, if at least this is just one method. If it's too cool, then you start adding 5 degrees until you get that nice look. If it gets too hot where your grid starts to run, it gets more transparent, if you will. Very little color to it, or just some color. You start getting a little cracking, holes. The reactive layer becomes heavier and heavier. The ideal is, of course, to get rid of that reactive layer is whatever the temperature, the lowest temperature that you can press your material out, regardless of whose material it is. If it's lithium disilicate, you want to go to the lowest that you can and have it press completely out, and that's the ideal. So just make sure you monitor that, do a press, testing. And so if you feel something's off, then you have the means here or one method that you can try it out and see where you're at and either raise or lower the temperature of your press furnace to adjust for your environment with that firing unit. We are at 880. This stuff does press out 880 if it's a small ring. We raise it slightly on a 200 gram, only because of the extra thickness of the investment material. We raise it 10 degrees. We also increase the hold time by 5 minutes, but everything else is pretty much static between 100 gram and 200 gram. We generally use about 3 bar in our system, and then it runs out. There's 2 levels, if you will. The first level is that if it presses quicker than, say, in this case, 3 minutes, what it'll do is cut that one off and it'll move into the secondary additional time and then run out there. And our furnaces is set so that it's pressure related. So as it feels pressure, it has resistance, it'll continue to press. But as soon as that resistance reaches a certain pushback, if you will, then it kind of senses that it's pressed out, and then it flows through the process much quicker. Looking at the material itself, this is what the pellet looks like, under a SEM. When you kind of blow it out, it kind of looks rough. You can see the grain structure. Now, this is a metasilicate stage, right? This is a stage in which it is not transformed into your disilicate crystals. And like other disilicates, it transforms, and then you end up with a lot of needle-like crystals. Now, because we have a little bit of lithium disilicate in there, we have a lot of silicate material. We've incorporated some zirconia as well, almost 8 to 12%. It's very similar to our Cervical material to add strength and so forth. But what VITA discovered was that this material, lithium disilicate, at least with our composition, that after you press it, there is a way that you can temper this. We used to do this in the old days for metals. We used to cast it, and then we would let it cool, work with it, and then we put it back in the oven, and we would temper it to realign some of the grains, to condense them, to make them so that it's much stronger. We found that true with our lithium disilicate material. And so after you've pressed it out, and you can put it back in the furnace, a standard furnace, as you will, and you can increase the strength, you know, from, say, 200, the average, or 400, the average flexural strength, all the way up to a little over 500, all right, 550. So you can actually increase the strength by doing this simple tempering firing process with the material. It's only a 20-minute cycle. It just goes to 800 degrees, holds at that temperature, and then at that point, you know, you've increased the strength of this substantially, and now it's jumps from about 400 all the way up to about 550, which is actually about the highest press material out there after you temper it. So it's a very nice material that you can add more to it. Polishing, you know, there's a comparison with Emax. Obviously, VITA is always trying to produce any material that they do, where that it's tooth-like, the shade consistent, but it also have the properties like a tooth, like it will wear, polish, shine, gloss like a natural tooth. So in the structure, by tempering it, you also bring in those crystalline structure a little bit more tighter, and you can actually get some nice homogeneous gloss look if all you do is polish it after you press it. Just like any other press material, you've got your own little indications as far as thickness, minimal thicknesses, so forth like that. It's pretty much across the board, crowns and bridges up to 3 units. It's only limited because of the size of the pellet. So, you know, you can do a 3-unit bridge up to 1.7 grams of wax. You can use this material for implant cases as well. So make sure you, you know, try this out on some of your implant cases as well. There's a starter kit available. Makes it really nice to kind of get an introduction. You should get a hold of, you know, your VITA rep, and they can help guide you. But we have a nice small kit that has pretty much everything needed from our side to provide you at a fairly low cost, introductory cost. And then, of course, you know, we have the various shades as a supplement to that kit. You know, before you ask, right, some people are going to say, oh, what's the price? What's this? Is it competitive? It's very competitive as far as the material goes. So, you know, currently without any discounts, which most of us enjoy some sort of discount, you know, it's about $24 each, up to 0.75 grams of wax. So, you know, you can do a couple with a small pellet. You can do a 3-gram pellet. You can do you know, a couple units. So it's very nice, and then it's very versatile as far as the entire umbrella of product ranges. Again, if you already have the Accent Plus, a universal stain, that'll work. You don't have to change that. If you have the Lumex, that works nice. Any of you worked with the Suprinity, the polishing kits are the same. And then, of course, the furnace and the investment. You can find more information, of course, on our site. There is an email address. You can go to the products of VITA Zon Fabric, or you can go to the VITA North American website and go under the banner products and locate Ambria press material. And you can get a lot of information on that. If you have a already an existing vacuum mat MP, a press furnace from us, if you don't have the Ambria or Lumex firing cycles already in there, you can go onto our website and actually download the new firing cycles for both Ambria for pressing, and then of course Lumex for the porcelain as well. But it's a very nice material. It presses out really nice. It's workable. I've ground some down. I've added some porcelain to them. These aren't my pictures, but you know, I'm not as gifted as these technicians who did this. But between the pellets, the press, and the Lumex, if you need to individualize it, you can pretty much achieve anything you want. And so again, it's really something that is easily introduced into your workflow. Most of the processes is similar to what you're used to, but what you won't be used to is now you have, after you press it, even full contour, you're going to have something that's going to give you that true shade that your dentist or what you're trying to achieve with very little characterization, staining necessary. You can either, again, after it's pressed, you can either polish it or you can stain and glaze this material, no problem. Again, all these webinars, today's webinar, as well as others that we've been doing over the few 6-8 weeks of what's gone on, you know, we really did a great job producing, creating, and then showing some videos and some webinars on all sorts of different topics. We're continuing to add those in. You can get a hold of us on our VITA social network, whether it's a VITA North American YouTube channel, the LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. You can go in there, look at the archives, pick and choose whatever webinars you want to have a CE as well, an hour, you know, but they're usually just an hour long, and that's it. So if you have time, please stop by our website and visit those. What you can also do if you have any additional questions or need support on any VITA product, please give us a call here. Paul Richardson and myself, we're both available here, working the help desk, and we can help you through, guide you through any of the workflow of any of the VITA products and help you out, no matter what it may be. So get a hold of us. Talk to us about whether the Ambria or Lumex AC or anything else. Those of you who have questions, please feel free to start adding those questions into your panel, and then I will answer those as they come, and then we'll kind of tie this up and get it done, and have you go out onto your day. So one of the questions we're getting from Williams is when can we get our CE credits? So the CE credits, you know, we always get this question, that once you're done with this webinar, there will be a follow-up email from our education that will ask a few questions, and then there'll be a link, whether you're a dentist or a technician. There'll be a little tab that you can click on, and that'll redirect you to a site where you need to provide us with your CDT information, or if you're a dentist, your information. And then we can, if you're NBC credit or Florida credits, what we will do is then send to those respective governing bodies your name and your CDT number so that you can get credit. And then Andreep has a question. So since these products have flexural strength of about 550, can it be used as a posterior restoration? The answer is yes. They can be used also for posterior 3-unit bridges as well. So it's a very flexible material, as long as your wax, the weight of your wax doesn't exceed what the pellet can press out with, then you can do that large of a bridge. So it may be possible you can even do a 4-unit and your bridge, a lower one, because you don't have a lot of wax there. And then, of course, if you're going to micro-layer it, that's less wax, because if you do all your cut back in the wax, it makes it a little bit lighter, and then you also have a much able to press out more units because of that lighter wax. The ratio of the lithium disilicate, I kind of showed that. Lithium disilicate was, what was it, around 12% or something like that. It's low. It's just there to provide that structure. What's important, though, is that we've added up to 12% of zirconia material into it to actually increase the strength and so forth. And the zirconia is that we've added to this to reinforce it, to make it even stronger. It's not like your zirconia that we mill today, right? It is a zirconia oxide crystal, but it actually, we've developed and figured out a way to add this raw material so that it actually dissolves within the matrix and uniformly fills out the pellet shape. This is true with the Serprinity as well. Lifespan of the material, William, I'm not sure if you're talking about clinically speaking, or if you're talking about bench, right, how long you can leave it in your lab, but I'll assume that you're doing clinical. So this should last if it's done right, indicate the correct indication. The margins are done right. The prep, you have rounded line angles and so forth. And then, of course, if you do it a press to zirconia or press to the standalone, or you just press it, it should last excess of, maybe even up to 20 years or more. It's like a traditional press unit. We've been dealing with this material for 30 years, press material. So clinically speaking, no problem. It's got a large lifespan of it. Can it be etchable? This material is etchable. It does have a matrix of the lithium disilicate, but also the zirconia, a small amount, but it's got a lot of silicate in it, right? The majority of it is silicate, almost 60% is silicate material. So it's very etchable. We would do a 5% hydrofluoric acid for about 20 seconds. And then we would silanate it, and then you would bond it. So Danny, I hope that answers your question. All right, if anybody else has any more questions, throw them in. Otherwise, I want to thank everybody for joining another VITA Learning webinar. We have, again, many of these webinars, various topics. We've done a 6-week series with Peter Peasy, Master Dental Technician, on a lot of things. We talk about shave, we talk about the Lumex, we talk about the digital dentures. So any of those topics, if you're interested in, come join us on our social media and watch those webinars, or watch the short videos. The videos we try to keep less than 10 minutes. Another shows since the surface treatment for zirconia and lithium differ, does it affect the strength of restoration when luted? The answer is no, because there's a small amount by weight of zirconia. So that's not the primary etched surface. It comes back to, again, 60% of that surface area is an etchable silicate, and then the rest of it is etchable as well, as far as the lithium disilicate. Those crystals can be etched. There's a small portion of zirconia, but it's infiltrated and homogenously set within that matrix, so you don't have a lot of contact, let's say, between the luting cement and your surface of zirconia that you generally use like a prime etch or a different material. That's not necessary for this. So that wraps it up. Unless someone has additional questions, And I want to thank you again, explain again to mask metal abutment. All right, so Danny, I mentioned this earlier that we get many calls that have a titanium abutment, and they want to either cement something over it, or they want to have a restoration, an all ceramic restoration. But as we all know, the titanium abutments, which are gray, will show through, and it'll significantly darken your all ceramic restorations. And it's true with the pressable material as well. So we actually sell a titanium porcelain line. However, when you deal with a titanium abutment, really the last thing you want to do is fire titanium, because the minute you introduce it into a furnace, it is going to build a heavy black oxide. And to try to prevent that, you have to first, before you can opaque and add a porcelain opaque onto a titanium abutment to mask it, you have to prime it. And it's a very specialized titanium primer or bonder, if you will, that is almost like a clear glaze that has to be treated onto the titanium correctly. Otherwise, it'll allow the oxide layer to continue to grow thicker. And when your oxide layer during the furnace, as it grows thicker, it becomes black, but it also becomes so heavy, so thick, that you can actually take an instrument and poke and pick at the oxide layer, and it'll actually strip off your titanium. It's just too thick. So the best way to mask out a titanium abutment before you get going is to use a composite system. A composite system, you're not going to alter the oxide layer, the natural oxide layer of titanium at room temperature. You're going to take an opacious, light cured masking material, and you'll use that to mask out your abutment first. And then once that's cured, then you can come back and then you can etch that composite. And then, on the clinic side, they just etch that composite, that opacious composite, and then you can come back and you actually bond your restoration on top of that. So I hope that helps with there. Do you use any silane coupling agents before luting to increase the bonding? The answer is yes. After you etch it, clean that up, you should use a silane, some kind of a coupling agent. That's always best. And then, of course, depending on your bonding system, on the self-adhesives, the all-in-one stuff, you just want to make sure that if it's a silane is a component of that, and also that if it's a phosphoric acid or a component that etches the tooth structure, you want to make sure that those are not past their shelf life, because once those things get exposed to the air, they kind of deteriorate over time. And self-adhesives and all-in-ones are probably the weakest bonding system. But as long as you're careful, everything should be fine. Any luting cement is going to be just fine, whether it's resin or not. And then whether it's self-curing or dual cure material. If it's too thick, your restoration, then you want to go to a dual cure, and so forth. But use silane. It's always better to make sure you lute it correctly. Do you think we have a lab day this year? Well, I think we'll have the Chicago next year. There's several digital denture shows that are scheduled later in the fall that I hope to see you out. There's the International Federation of Dentures and things like that. There's one in Atlanta going on this fall as well. San Antonio has another one that they rescheduled later in the fall. So there are some shows. Hopefully once we get past July, we won't have too many more cancellations of shows. So I hope everyone got something out of this. And if not, you're always welcome to give me a call back and say, hey, you know, give me more information. Talk to Paul or myself. But this will conclude the VITA learning webinar on VITA Ambria, the newest pressed ceramic out in the market. I want to thank everyone for joining, and I would like to see that everyone stays healthy and well, and we will talk to you again sometime. Thank you for attending.